Tired of blurry photos? Let me tell you how to get crisp, clear, sharp photos every time. Here is the answery bit. Achieving pin-sharp images goes beyond just nailing focus. A truly sharp photo is a balanced equation involving elements you might not realise affect your final image. Whilst your camera's autofocus system excels at where to focus, it can't stop camera shake, which is tiny camera movements during the exposure, or motion blur, which is the subject moving. These are two of the major culprits of soft images, especially in lower light. Your lens also plays a huge role in getting sharp photos. Every lens has a sweet spot, which is an aperture, often f5.6 to f11, where they are the sharpest. And shooting narrower or wider, it can reduce the sharpness and it introduces other errors. And then there's digital noise from high ISO settings, which really can detract and make images look less sharp. So we need to understand our gear and our image capture techniques to get the ultimate sharpness. It's about optimizing shutter speed to freeze motion, choosing the correct aperture for clarity, keeping your camera stable with a proper grip or a tripod, and leveraging post-processing sharpening. Yes, dear listener, this holistic approach transforms snapshots into crystal clear images. Right, that was the answery bit. Hi, and a very warm welcome to episode 210, blimey, of the Photography Explained podcast. I don't know why I'm always shocked with the number. Maybe I wasn't ever expecting to get to episode 210. But here I am and I'm happy with that. I'm your host, Rick. Hello there. And in each episode, I explain one photographic thing in plain English in less than 27 minutes-ish without the irrelevant details. I'm a professionally qualified photographer based in England with a lifetime of photographic experience which I share with you in my podcast. Okay, to begin with, understanding sharpness, the core principle for crystal clear photos. The way I'm talking today, it sounds as though I'm reading somebody else's script, which I'm not. I'm struggling to get my words out, so bear with me. Don't worry, I'll edit out that dreadful... I couldn't say crystal then I just couldn't say crystal then, but I've edited that bit out. I won't put you through that. Sharpness defines an image's clarity and distinctness of detail. Well-defined elements, textures and edges appearing crisp and precise. While focus determines which part's clear, sharpness describes how clear it truly is. Consistently capturing pin-sharp images goes beyond just relying on autofocus. Many photographers struggle with seemingly in-focus images that still lack crispness, often due to subtle camera shake, motion blur, or incorrect camera settings. To start with, you need to properly understand how your camera works. Read your camera manual. That's a great starting point. I've read the manual on my Canon 6D. I read it from cover to cover and I found out all sorts of things that I didn't know. So when you're taking a photo, you must minimise any movement during the exposure, whether from your hands or the subject. If your hands move or you move, you get camera shake and that's not good. And if the subject moves, you get motion blur. Either of these two things will ruin a photo. So understanding sharpness. Understanding sharpness more than just focus. Yeah, it's not just about focus. There's all these other things in there. So what else do we need to consider? Well, camera shake. I've covered that. Any camera movement during exposure. Camera shake basically is any movement by you when you're taking a photo. Camera shake, it's down to you. I'm sorry. Motion blur is the movement of your subject during an exposure. Now, that might not be your fault, but it is if you haven't got the right shutter speed to capture it. Lens quality. Well, it's going to vary between lenses. I can't go into all these things now, but it's just one thing to bear in mind. If you've got a really low quality lens, you're going to struggle to get photos as sharp as somebody taking them with a professional standard lens. It's just a fact of life. One we don't often think about is atmospheric conditions, and I'm talking here about general haze, heat haze, or even pollution, poor air quality, which can affect clarity, and these things compound over distance. Yes, they do. And then there's digital noise, high ISO settings. I hate higher ISO settings. I always use ISO 100 when I can. High ISO settings introduce noise, and that will reduce the perceived... Well, I've said in my script, reducing perceived sharpness. It's not reducing the perceived sharpness, is it? It's reducing the sharpness of the photo as perceived by the viewer. So it's reducing the sharpness. That's a better way of putting it. Okay, specifics. Here are 5 top tips for getting sharp photos every time. Tip 1. Shutter speed for sharp photos. Freeze motion, eliminate blur, and in brackets, the power of a tripod. I love my tripod. So shutter speed refers to the time your camera's shutter remains open, allowing light to hit the sensor. Sounds obvious, but not everybody knows that. Now, I'm a photographer who uses a tripod for every photo that I can. And why do I do this? Well, this helps me to get the maximum sharpness by eliminating as much camera movement as possible during exposure. Exposure, not exposure. Your camera's on a tripod, it's nice and steady with good image capture technique. Your camera should be as still as it can be, which minimises, if not gets rid completely, of any camera shake. Okay, freezing motion. For still subjects, especially when using a tripod, you can confidently use slower shutter speeds such as 1/30th of a second or even seconds for long exposures without introducing motion blur. Now we're talking here about something that's still like a building. As soon as you introduce, vegetation, trees, planters, stuff like that, those things move. So we're talking about fixed things. But for handheld shots, there's a reciprocal rule, which is 1 over the focal length, which sounds more complicated than it is. Let me give you an example. If you're using a 50mm focal length, your shutter speed should be 1 over the focal length, which is 1/50th of a second or faster, which in this instance would be 1/60th of a second. But don't go below 1/60th of a second shooting handheld, because you're introducing the risk of camera shake, which gives you blurry photos. I'll come on to one way of preventing that in a minute. But fast-moving subjects, sports cars, what have you, you need to use faster shutter speeds. And we're talking 1/500th of a second, 1/1000th of a second, or shorter. I nearly said longer then. I always get these things the wrong way around. Camera shake minimization. A sturdy tripod is the best way to get rid of camera shake, allowing for extremely long exposures and maximizing the details you can capture in static scenes, such as landscapes or architecture. What I do, I use a tripod and it gives me a further benefit. It helps me to get the verticals vertical and the horizontals horizontal. So it's helping me not only get sharp photos, but get the best composition that I can. So what do you do if you can't use a tripod? You might not have one with you. You might not have one. And it's low light and your shutter speed's looking a bit of a concern. Say it's showing 1/15th of a second with your chosen aperture. Well, with modern cameras and lenses, you've got something called image stabilization. You can get lens image stabilization or in-body stabilization within the camera body. Now, my Canon 6D doesn't have this. My Canon 17 to 40mm lens doesn't have this, and that's why I use a tripod. But I do have a Canon 70 to 200mm f4LIS lens, which gives me a whopping 4 stops of image stabilization, which means that I can, well, I'm going to try and work this out now, which I might regret. So if I'm using a focal length of 100mm handheld, my shutter speed should be 1/100th of a second, which, if we're going by the shutter speed scale, that'd be 1/125th of a second. So if I go 1 stop, that's 1/60th of a second. If I go 2 stops, that's 1/30th of a second. If I go 3 stops, that's 1/15th of a second. If I go 4 stops, that's 1/8th of a second. So in theory, I can take a photograph at 1/8th of a second, handheld with 100mm focal length, using image stabilization, which will be as sharp as a photograph taken at a 1/125th of a second shutter speed. That's how it works. And it does work. It's incredible. So camera bodies, in-body image stabilization, shortened inevitably to IBIS, Image stabilization in lens, IS. Okay, these are massively helpful tools, and 4 stops of image stabilization it's significant. It really is. And if you're taking photos on a tripod, don't just stab the shutter button when you're taking a photo. Use a remote shutter release or the self-timer built into your camera, or in this modern day and age, the Wi-Fi app built into your camera and phone. So you're eliminating vibrations from physically pressing the shutter button. Again, there's more than one aspect to getting sharp focus, and how you take photos is one of them. So mastering shutter speed and embracing the stability of a tripod, these are fundamental to achieving sharp photos and eliminating unwanted blur. And that's what we want. We want to eliminate unwanted blur. We want every photo to be as sharp as we can get it. Right, tip 2, aperture for maximum photo sharpness and the depth of field that you need for the photo. So while shutter speed deals with motion, aperture controls the depth of field, or as I like to call it, depth of sharpness. And that impacts, of course, on the overall perceived sharpness in a photo. So depth of field is the range of distances appearing acceptably sharp within a composition, or as I like to call it, depth of sharpness. I mean, where does the field come into this anyway? A wide aperture, which is a small f number, be careful Rick, like f1.8, that creates a shallow depth of field, and that isolates subjects with blurred backgrounds, and this requires precise focusing on the subject matter. So the smaller the aperture, the more precise you need to be, and the longer the focal length, the more precise you need to be, because if you zoom in, you're sort of magnifying the problem, you're making it hard to get things right. But a narrow aperture, which is a large number like f16, I love the aperture scale, this creates a large depth of field which keeps more of the scene sharp, and this is common in landscape photography. And then there's the bit in the middle, the lens sweet spot. Every lens has an optical sweet spot. Doesn't matter how expensive it is, it doesn't matter how cheap it is, every lens has a sweet spot somewhere in the middle, probably of the aperture range. And it's often 2 to 3 stops narrower than its widest aperture. On my Canon 17 to 40mm lens, my sweet spot is f8. And that's why I take all my photos at f8. Because at 17mm, I've got the depth of field that I need. Depth of sharpness, sorry. And it's given me the highest quality image capture. It's all so important, and all these things are working together. And maximum and minimum apertures at both ends of the scale, they can introduce softness, and there are other errors which I won't go into here. But if you're shooting wide open and you're getting softness around the edges of the photo and you're taking, say, photos of people, do you care? No, you don't, because that's out of focus anyway. So you just need to remember that. It depends what you're taking photographs of. But if I used f32 on a super wide lens and it gave me really bad distortion or blur or some other error around the edges, I'd be bothered about that. So what you're taking photographs of does have an impact on the scale of the problem. And you can get diffraction at very narrow apertures too, which is like bending around the blades causing image softening. So basically, avoid maximum and minimum aperture if you want the sharpest photos. And you also need to be absolutely clear about the aperture's influence on depth of field, how much the photo is sharp from front to back. It's no good having something super sharp in a photo if the subject matters out of photo. You need to think about these things, but you also need to know about your lenses, how they work, how depth of sharpness is calculated, and also where the sweet spot is and what errors you can get with your lens. So much to learn, isn't there? But the good news is, once you've learned it, you know it, and you can apply that to every photo you take with that lens going forwards. So it's time well invested, dear listener. Tip 3, ISO settings. Avoid noise for crystal clear sharpness. ISO controls camera sensitivity. That's not strictly correct. Every camera has a base or native ISO. With my Canon 6D, it's 100. My Canon 6D is designed to take photos with an ISO of 100. If I change the ISO to 200, it's in effect making photos brighter. It is not changing the sensitivity of the camera sensor to light. It's not, that's fixed. It's making photos brighter. That's the way to look at it. You're just dialing up the brightness. So the more you dial it up, the more you're doing digital amplification of what you're taking photos of, which can't be a good thing, can it? The higher the ISO, the higher the chance of getting digital noise, which I like to describe as digital bad stuff. I don't get any at ISO 100, but my camera's on a tripod. I've covered all that. I'll probably cover it again. But the higher the ISO, the higher the chance of digital noise. This takes us onto a conundrum, doesn't it? A noisy photo versus a sharp photo. Now, if you're in low light, you're taking a photo handheld, and you cannot get a fast enough shutter speed to get a sharp photo without raising the ISO, what do? Well, you raise the ISO, but only as much as you need to, because if you don't, and you take a photo handheld and it's blurry, you've got nothing. But if you've increased the ISO and you've got a noisy photo that's sharp, you've got something to work with, haven't you? Yes, you have. Golden rule: use the lowest ISO setting possible for the given light. This minimises noise and preserves detail. I take photos with a camera on a tripod, meaning I can use an ISO of 100, which is the ISO my Canon 6D was designed to take photos with. A noisy photo is better than a blurry photo. You can do something with noise in post-processing, but you cannot fix a blurry photo. And a quick word on noise reduction in post-processing. Use it subtly, because what it's doing is taking away from the sharpness. So you can reduce the noise, but what you're actually doing is taking the sharpness away. So sometimes it just doesn't benefit you. Keeping the ISO as low as you can do is crucial for preserving inherent sharpness and achieving crystal clear images. Tip 4. Lens and technique: mastering camera stability for sharp images. Your lens is probably more important than your camera body when it comes to sharpness, unless you got in-body image stabilization in the body, of course. So let's talk about lenses. First thing, prime lenses, as in not zoom lenses. So prime lenses, they've got a fixed focal length, and they are generally optically sharper than zoom lenses because they're designed for a single optimal performance point. And then you've got zoom lenses, and the higher the quality of the zoom lens, the better the quality, and the less you can tell the difference from prime lenses. And more expensive lenses with a constant maximum aperture, they can give you higher quality across the zoom range, but with cheaper lenses, you might lose quality at one end or the other or the middle. Again, you need to know how your lens performs, where it's best, because, like I say, some lenses, you go to the longest focal length and they're really soft, and you don't want that, do you? No, you don't. But in general terms with lenses, the more money you get, the better the quality of the images you'll capture. In general terms, obviously there's a million and one variables in this. And the difference in quality between zoom lenses and prime lenses is probably closer than it ever has. In fact, it's definitely closer than it ever has been with the advances in optical technology. See, I use a Canon 17 to 40mm lens, and I take 95% of my photos at 17mm. So could I survive with a 17mm prime lens? I'd probably be fine with it. And if I got the 17mm tilt shift lens, even better, but it's manual focus, and that's another problem. But I'm now going off script and digressing, aren't I? So I need to get back onto it. Cheap filters. Now, people use UV filters, protector filters, and what have you to protect the front lens element. If you get a cheap one, it's going to degrade the image quality. It's going to degrade the sharpness. You're not going to get a sharper photo. You might get reflections, glare, or other errors. So get the best optical glass filters that you can afford and look after them. Look after them and they will serve you for many years. Lens hoods. Use a lens hood to block stray light from entering the lens. This prevents lens flare, which it washes out contrast, and it can make images appear less sharp even if you're perfectly focused. And a lens hood protects your front lens from any kind of damage because it's sticking out in front of your lens, and I always take photos with the lens hood on. Lens cleanliness. Dust, smudges, fingerprints, anything on your front or rear lens element, let's not forget the rear lens element, they can dramatically reduce sharpness. So keep your front and rear lens elements clean using a proper lens cleaning solution and a proper cloth. I use disposable cloths. I'm not saying you have to. There are lens cleaning cloths out there, but I use disposable cloths. I'm paranoid about scratching my front and rear lens elements, and I feel it's worth the investment. And they don't cost a fortune, and a pack of 100 lasts me quite a long time. Side issue there, I don't change my lens that often, so I don't need to worry about the rear lens element, because once I've cleaned it and it's on my camera body, it's not exposed to anything, so I don't need to clean it again until I don't know, take it off in a dusty environment, which I don't do, so that helps. I'm not saying never change lens, of course. Move on, Rick, move on. Focusing accuracy. Yeah, autofocus modes. Again, we're going back to understanding your camera and the different autofocus modes, such as single shot AF for static subjects and continuous AF for moving subjects. This will help you get sharper focus for the images that you're taking. So it's just not one setting that you use forever and a day. Okay, focus points and recomposing. Now, don't just rely on the central focus point. Actively select the specific focus points that relate to your composition, the thing that you want in focus more. And that could be someone's eyes or a feature in a building. And this is what I do. My Canon 6D, it's got 11 focus points. One of the new Canons has got nearly 5,000 focus points. My Canon 6D's got 11, and I choose the focus point manually before I take a photo. And no, it doesn't take forever. And I also use back button focus for even greater control. Yes, you've guessed it. I'm obsessed about getting the sharpest photos that I can every time I take a photo, and I'm not going to apologise for that. Right, another one which came up in the research was manual focus. Now, for very precise work, particularly in low light or with challenging subjects like architectural details, manual focus using focus peaking or magnification in your viewfinder can be more accurate than autofocus. In theory, I don't do this, but then again, I'm quite old. My eyes are quite old. Well, my eyes will be quite old because I'm quite old, aren't I? And my camera's quite old too, but not as old as me. My camera's autofocus works better, without exception, than manual focus using my eyes. But if your eyes are good, you might want to try it. I don't. I haven't manually focused since about 1975 probably. Showing my age there. Camera stability and vibrations. Now, proper hand holding the camera. This is so important. You need to hold your camera in a certain way, as in left hand cradling the body, right hand on the grip, elbows in, camera up to your eye. Yes, I'm actually doing this whilst I'm talking to you. Breathe in, breathe out slowly, press the shutter button. Brace yourself against something that's not moving if you want extra stability. But do these things and you'll get sharper photos. It gives you a bit more latitude when you're using slower shutter speeds as well. But I do this all the time, even with a fast shutter speed. Not that I'm ever taking photographs handheld. And then there's mirror lockup, which on a DSLR you can activate mirror lockup, and that minimises vibrations because you flip the mirror up first and then you take the photo. The two operations, I believe, are separate. I'd forgotten about this completely. Maybe I need to revisit that, yeah. See, I was researching this and I came across this and I went, I probably should have been doing this for donkey's years. I'd forgotten. I'll look into that one. But if you've got a mirrorless camera, it's not a problem, is it? Well, of course it isn't. You haven't got a mirror. What do you think the name mirrorless camera stands for anyway? To summarise, investing in quality lenses and mastering proper shooting techniques, they will help you to get the sharpest photos you can every time. Okay, tip 5, post-processing sharpening, the final touch for pro photo quality. This is in addition to everything that I've said. It's a combination of all the things. So we're talking here about sharpening. Now, digital camera sensors, by the nature, apply a slight softening to prevent aliasing. Now, what's aliasing? I haven't got a clue. And I'm not even going to look into it and tell you because I don't need to know. The raw capture process, it benefits from a bit of gentle sharpening, but when you look at a raw photo without any editing, it looks rubbish. But you've got more data to work with. A JPEG photo will look a load sharper than a raw photo. That's only because the JPEG has processing applied when you take a photo. So shooting raw, that's what I do, sharpen later. And you can sharpen a whole image or you can just do parts of the image. Now, for the work I do global sharpening to all of an image. I want it all equally sharp. So I don't bother with local adjustment for sharpness, masking bits, brushing bits in to make bits sharp and other bits not sharp. And when you're sharpening photos of people, just be careful what you sharpen because you can end up making somebody, I don't know if, well, not sharper, but if you sharpen someone's face too much, you might exaggerate facial features such as wrinkles, which none of us want, do we? No, you can do this and it can be a little bit unflattering. And then there's output sharpening where you sharpen for what you're doing with the photo. So if you're sharpening for, I don't know, for screen viewing, that's going to be a bit more aggressive than it is for print. So just be careful what you're sharpening. And don't over sharpen. Over sharpening looks false, it looks artificial, it looks awful. So what I do when I'm sharpening, I select an area I want to sharpen, I zoom to 100%, and then I do a manual slide and get to the sweet spot in sharpening terms. And I just do this in Lightroom. I slide to the right until it starts to get a little bit funny, then I go back left and I stop and it's done. And once I've sharpened one photo, I can copy and paste those settings onto all the other photos taken at the same time with the same thing. So let's be as smart as we can about this. But you got to be subtle and realistic. Right, what if I use a phone to take photos? Well, these days you can get really sharp photos with smartphones. What can help us? So good light can help us to take photos regardless of what we're doing. And the more light there is, the lower the ISO, less digital noise and sharper images. I'm not sure if this applies to phones or if it's all done electronically these days because I don't study it too much. I only take photos with my phone for snaps. But steady hands, good image capture technique, it's all going to help you, isn't it? And if you try harder than other people to get the sharpest photo you can, your photo should be sharper than other people's, which has to be a good thing, doesn't it? Now, here's a great tip I hadn't thought about. Use the volume button to take photos rather than tapping the screen because you can get yourself into a more natural holding position and just touch the volume button. This podcast really is a learning process, isn't it? Because that's two things I've learned today, or two things that I've forgotten that I've reminded myself about. Tap to focus. Yep, tap your subject to ensure precise autofocus. So if you're taking a photograph of a person, make sure that the face is the thing that the phone is focusing on, and then take the photo using the volume button. And lens cleaning applies, of course it does. Keep your lens on your phone as clean as you do your lens on your camera. Well, why wouldn't you? And with phones, they're with us all the time, aren't they? They're in pockets, in bags and everything. They are much more prone to getting stuff on the lens. Be mindful of getting the sharpest photos you can because most people taking photos with their phones aren't. And doing these things, you can make your photos sharper than other people's, which will make them stand out. What do I do? Well, as a professional architectural and real estate photographer, pin sharp images, they're not a preference, they're a fundamental requirement for me and my work. So every time I take a photo, my aim is to get the sharpest photo I can. So how do I do this? I've told you what you do, so this is me telling you now, very briefly, what I do. First is my tripod. My constant companion goes with me everywhere and it eliminates every trace of camera shake. And this allows me to use the best aperture for every photo to get the cleanest, sharpest image every time, with the depth of field I want and with no distortion or lens errors. I use back button focus. So I focus, and once I got my focus locked in, then I separately press the shutter release button and start the self timer to take the photo. And it takes the photo 10 seconds later. And the shutter speed, well, I don't really care what the shutter speed is because I'm taking photographs of buildings, which thankfully they're not moving. So this only becomes an issue for me when things are moving. And this is the vegetation around buildings, trees, planting, hedges, you name it. Those things moving, I need to think about them. But I love a photo where the building's sharp and all the natural bits around it are blurry. So in those instances, I'll do a bit of both. Well, why not, eh? And then there's my good old underrated lens hood. I always use a lens hood for every photo I take. It stops lens flare, stops unwanted light from spoiling the photos, and it's the only thing that I use to protect my front lens element from damage. It's the best free camera accessory you can get, in my opinion. I use ISO 100. My camera was designed to do that. I increase the ISO when I have to get a shutter speed to give me a sharp photo. That's it. Focusing. I choose the focus point manually for every photo I take. Yes, I really do this. And I always use the built-in self-timer to take photos, avoiding any movement of the camera. I shoot in RAW, and in the post-processing, I sharpen every photo using the visual slider at 100% in Lightroom. That's it. It's not that much when I talk about it, and what I do is built into my workflows, how I work. It's just baked into everything that I do. With the aim, every time I take a photo, get the sharpest photo you can. That's how I approach every photo. And a couple of other things I want to point you in the direction of here. Episode 177, Photography Tips, How to Actually Take a Photo. It tells you how to take a photo, how to stand, how to hold your camera, how and when to breathe. It was a really good episode, so check it out for a bit more detail. Right, final takeaways and a summary for achieving pin-sharp photos. Yes, a new section. It was going to be called the big takeaway, but that sounded a bit cheesy, so I got rid of that. Here it is. Eliminate anything compromising image clarity. So we're talking camera shake, motion blur, digital noise. Choose the aperture, focus precisely, use image stabilization or a tripod, and refine in post-processing. Do all these things together to get the best photos that you can. Next episode. Well, episode 211, camera modes, when to use aperture priority, shutter priority, and manual. Yep, excited to cover these three because those are the only modes that I use, and in this episode I am going to tell you why. Get an email from me. Well, do you want a weekly email from me? Well, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you, eh? Just fill in the box on any of my websites, and every Friday you'll read my photography thoughts in an email from me to you. Ask me a question. You got a question? Email me, sales@rickmcevoyphotography.co.uk, or visit the podcast website, and you can even text me from the podcast feed. It's always lovely to hear from you, my dear listeners, even if you only want to say hi. And here's something I've forgotten to say as well. Subscribe and never miss an episode. Yes, if you're enjoying the podcast, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. This ensures you get every episode, and it helps me to reach more photographers, so don't delay. Subscribe today. This episode was brought to you by... I'm sounding a little bit obsessive now at this point. A cheese and pickle sandwich and a bag of salt and vinegar crisps, which I consumed before I settled down in my homemade, acoustically cushioned recording emporium. I've been Rick McEvoy. Thanks again for listening to my small but perfectly formed podcast, and for giving me 27-ish minutes of your valuable time. Now, I reckon this episode could be a long one, which I've had to record, for reasons I won't go into now, in 3 takes, so I'm hoping you don't notice. Well, you won't notice, of course you won't. If I hadn't said anything, you wouldn't have known. No, things happened that meant I had to stop and start again, which is all fine. It's all part of the fun, isn't it? So I reckon this episode, it could be, I don't know, it could be between 30 and 40 minutes, this one. I'll find out after I've edited. But please remember one thing. The longer the episode, the more time it took me to edit. That's why I like shorter episodes. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Thanks for listening. Take care and stay safe. Cheers from me, Rick.